Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Ghosts of Bacon. Here we are, August 22nd already. It's hard to believe, gang. Already see our live viewers kind of filling up here. So great to see all your happy, shining names. I can't see your faces. Judy, hey, good evening to you. Thank you very much. Hi, Don, Curtis. Thanks for joining us, gang. And like I said, what I want to do tonight, quickly, I'm going to be introducing our guest. This is going to be a very interesting podcast, I think, because my guest tonight, Stephanie McPeak Petersen, author of The Higher Octave. She has some very, very interesting theories and ideas regarding Bacon's New Atlantis, and that's how she and I kind of crossed paths. Now, her information is a little different than what we normally do. I really want to try to keep bringing new faces, new voices here to the group and to the podcast, because you really don't need to listen to me drone on and on about ciphers all the time. Let's face it, I get bored with that. Okay, maybe I don't, but hey, Daniel, good evening to you. Chris, Dona, thanks for coming, man. I appreciate it. Hey, Penn, my sister is one of my biggest supporters. Appreciate you very much, Penn. Hey, Jason, if those of you who haven't seen it, Jason has posted a couple of really stellar posts here lately in the Facebook groups, in the interwebs, regarding some of his discoveries of some of Sir Francis Bacon's ciphers. Jason, you are becoming already quite adept at identifying those things. Like I said, you took that one image and took it well beyond where I took it, and I was really, really impressed and pleasantly surprised. Good information. Thanks, Daniel. Okay, I'm going to put this up on screen just because. Okay, my wife needs to see this particular message. She, however, Daniel, does not like to hear me drone on. Just saying. All right, listen, gang. I'm going to bring on Stephanie McPeak Petersen, and I'm going to let her introduce herself and talk to you a little bit about what her book is about, and then we're going to get into her just really cool and unique perspective on Bacon's New Atlantis. So, if everyone could please go ahead and please welcome Stephanie McPeak Petersen. Thanks, Stephanie. I appreciate you so much coming on for this episode.
And I don't have a microphone like you, so let me know if I'm not loud enough or if I'm too loud.
You're perfect. You're perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, I know, Tom. Some of my usual viewers are already busting my chops, Stephanie. So, like I said, I warned everyone. I warned Stephanie ahead of time in the pre-show that she was going to be here amongst friends and just all around real good peeps. So thanks for joining us tonight, everyone, and Stephanie. So Stephanie, if you would, I'm just going to ask you, go ahead and just tell us about yourself. What your background is, and after that we can kind of get into a general overview of your book, because I really want you to be able to talk about that and plug that a little bit here tonight.
Okay.
So go ahead, tell us about yourself.
Well, this is not my field. I want to start by saying that.
There's a lot of that going around, just so you know.
I had heard of Francis Bacon 6 months ago, but I would never have imagined that I would be writing about anything that he's ever done. I went to school and majored in English. So, I obviously didn't really know what I wanted to do until my 30s. And my interest is in economics primarily. And
wow.
I had written a book for kids on economics, for kids as young as 8.
Oh, that's cool.
That's kind of my field. I'm not an economist. I don't have a degree in that. But I'm very interested in behavioral incentives, Mises, an economist I admire, wrote a book called Human Action. And really, economics is just all about human behavior, what motivates us to do things. And some of that involves money, but not all of it. So.
Right. Well, the very popular, famous book, Freakonomics, does a really great job of explaining the idea of incentives and what they really are. And like you just said, they're not actually always monetary. So
right.
That's really interesting. Yeah, keep going. This is great.
And I wanted to teach my two kids that. So that's why I wrote my first book, was just to teach them about incentives to behave well in a community setting. Many of those are financial. So I wrote that, and then being an English major, I love Shakespeare, obviously. So that was an interest. But I had set out to write a book at the beginning of this year that was primarily going to be, again, about economics. But this time I wanted to write also about music, because I played music when I was young. I didn't like performing, so I didn't stick with that. But I played in school, and I played violin and piano, and I achieved a perfect score my senior year of high school playing piano solo at state contest. And one of the things that you have to do at state contest is a 4-octave scale in any key that they request that you do. So I had to know all of them. Mm-hmm. And so I probably know scales better than I know anything else in music, since I didn't stick with it, and I didn't really have a big repertoire of pieces that I could play, but I knew every damn scale. And that information came in handy more recently when I was thinking about certain economic things. I also write a lot of poetry that has an economic theme. So I'm more interested in kind of approaching economics from a weird direction.
I really like that. And for a variety of reasons. First of all, I am an English teacher by grade. And, I write poetry and I have a background in music as well. So when you sent me those sample chapters and I was reading it, I was going to use a pun to say it resonated, but I won't do that.
I've been using that word a lot myself lately. It's a good word. It works for this. It works.
But so yeah, that's really, really cool. And so, it seems to me that your background really kind of prepared you for how you have kind of meshed together this idea of octaves in particular and economics. So how exactly does that work? Is there a way that you can kind of explain that to us? I mean, I understood it because I've read the chapters you sent me, but
see, I did have to write a book to explain it, because it's not an elevator conversation. You can't really cover everything in a soundbite. But there are two things that I could say. First of all is that economics are very scale dependent. And when I mean scale dependent, I mean size dependent. And so is music, depending on the tuning system that you use. One of the reasons that we tune music today using equal temperament is so that we can scale. We can change key. We can travel from one octave to another without distortion, because true just intervals in tuning systems from the past that were based on whole number ratios rather than square roots and that sort of thing, which is what we're based on now.
Sure.
Those intervals are beautiful, but they don't scale. You can't play a low C and then go up several fifths above it and play another C and have it actually be a perfect octave above. It won't work. In fact, that's what we call Pythagorean tuning. If you stack fifths, you'll find that when you get around to the next octave, it doesn't meet up at the top of the circle of fifths. It does kind of one of these. And it actually turns into more of a spiral than a circle. So that's one way that it correlates to economics, is that there are scaling issues in both of these disciplines.
Sure. Yeah.
But the other big way that they correlate is that I ended up focusing a lot on the harmonic series, because that is a great way of building a scale and tuning pure, just intervals that sound good, but that also work, you can scale with the harmonic series.
Right, right. So could you, for the, people who don't have a musical background watching right now, we have multiple live viewers right now. So could you explain to them what that harmonic is, the harmonic series?
Okay, so if I play a note on a guitar string or on a keyboard, piano, sometimes you can hear an overtone as the string is vibrating, or strings. From your fundamental note that you're playing, there are harmonic overtones above that naturally occur, for lack of a better word.
Again, due to the resonance,
Yeah.
and the vibration.
Yeah.
Maybe a way that people could, a very common musical instrument that is the harmonica, which actually mimics that idea. Maybe if our listeners and viewers kind of imagine that sound of how you hear multiple tones within a harmonica, it's playing upon the harmonic of that original note, and that's what you're describing.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah. Okay.
And so the harmonics exist as a series, and they're just natural things, just like plants or water. They just are. But mathematically, we can locate the harmonics by multiplying the frequencies. So if you're starting with a tonic note and you multiply that tonic frequency by 3, you're going to hit the perfect fifth above. And it is kind of math, and I'm not mathematical at all. I'm an English major. I want to stress this. So the math that is behind all of this is in the book. I'm probably not going to be great at explaining that, but I did research it and write it down. But so there's a lot of multiplication in the harmonic series. And the way that notes are generated in the harmonic series is by multiplying off the tonic, off the fundamental note. And there is this checks and balance system in the harmonic series that correlates to economics. So right now, we live in a debt-based system where our money is inflated. And correct. All that means is that it's being, more and more of it is being printed, or it isn't being printed so much as it just turns out.
It appears on the screen somewhere.
Yeah. But the money supply is growing exponentially. And musicologists have talked about the threat of this happening in music. And it's all based on the power of 2, which is the power of the octave, and the power of 3, which is the power of the fifth. And these two powers of multiplication have a creative tension between them, and they check one another.
Right.
We could have this in our economic system as well, but we don't, because we use equal temperament tuning. And that kind of removes the power of 3, the multiplicative power of 3 that the harmonic series uses to check the power of 2. Because if you don't check that, these octaves will take over. And I'm not the only person to have noticed this. There are smarter people than me, and I've quoted them in this concern. And it's a matter-based concern, because the power of 2 is matter-based, power of 3 is more spiritual. And so our economic system is lacking a spiritual side and something to check this ever-increasing inflationary, expansionary nature of our economy.
Again, it's absolutely fascinating. The connection between these two, what on the surface would be completely different disciplines, and you see them based upon the exact same principles, and mathematical principles. And that was one of the things that I think Sir Francis Bacon, with his approach to music in particular, he saw it as a field of physics.
Yeah.
And of course, along with physics is math. And then, we got a good comment here. My friend Jason Mercer, I think it was Kepler that found each planet or celestial body had its own note. You're talking about the music of the spheres, I think. And
well, Kepler did, and then Pythagoras before him.
Correct. And I think that was one of the things that Sir Francis Bacon was kind of in a way, kind of poo-pooing or rejecting a little bit. He felt that the Pythagorean and Platonic, in particular, systems
Mhm.
really were missing key pieces and key elements. So, and I think you kind of get into that in your book, isn't that right?
He was not a fan of Pythagoras, oddly enough.
Right.
Um,
Which
but
is
that's
kind of weird because people who are interested in sorry to interrupt you, people who are interested in secret societies and the Rosicrucians, they really believe that there are a lot of Pythagorean elements to the Rosicrucians, for example. And there are, in a sense, but I think that what Bacon was doing was trying to kind of revamp the teachings of the Pythagorean mystery school and trying to improve it. That's speculation on my part, but I just wanted to throw that in there. This is great. Good.
that's what I've seen from Bacon scholars. That's what they say. Because I'm not a Bacon scholar. Like I said, I really wasn't looking at him before 6 months ago. So
Well, a lot of the viewers here tonight were familiar with my work, and a lot of them have kind of become involved in it as well. Uh, he is one of these characters that there are multiple rabbit holes associated with Sir Francis Bacon, and suddenly when you find yourself in one, it just doesn't end. It just keeps going, and I'm sure that you found the same thing. That the more you discovered, the more questions arise, and the more you start to kind of dig in. Is that right?
yeah,
Yeah.
it was weird. And I'm hooked now, but it's certainly not something that I ever planned on doing. So
Same here. And so, that kind of brings us to the next question, and something that I really wanted you to get into is this idea of how did you kind of get into this in the first place? I mean, you and I have conversations about this a little bit, but I know that the people watching tonight are going to be really interested in how all of this kind of came about, because once, like you just said, all of a sudden you were never interested before, but now all of a sudden here's this huge mystery in front of you, and you just have to keep on digging. That's what happened with me as well.
yeah.
So how did you fall into this? Go ahead and tell us.
Well, when I first started writing the book about music and economics, the first thing that I stumbled over, which was going to be the obvious big boulder in my path, was Plato.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading a book by Ernest McLean called The Pythagorean Plato. And in this book, it's kind of difficult to follow, and there's math, and that's not, I probably didn't absorb all of it. But what he was saying in this book is that Plato was encoding all of this musical information in his work. So in the Republic, or any city-state that he's describing the politics and the structural kind of yin and yang of any city-state that he's describing, he's also talking in metaphor of music. So McLean believed that the various cities that he was discussing, Plato, were all tuned differently, like a musical tuning system. And the only city-state or place that Plato described without a tuning system was Atlantis. Atlantis was untempered, and everybody else was tempered. And Plato was making arguments for temperament because musical temperament is like musical regulation. It's law giving. And so he was making the connection between, well, we have to temper our music just like we have to temper ourselves and have these laws to keep everybody in line and to keep them acting temperate and sober.
Sure.
And so I covered this, and I talked about this because Plato has a long historical connection to archons of ancient Greece that were debasing their currency. So that was my interest. That's where I was looking.
Okay, so that's a really cool connection, just coming from a totally different direction. That's really interesting. My good friend Chris Dona just popped up this great comment. The famous astronomer from the first century, Ptolemy, wrote an earlier work entitled Harmonicon, known as the Harmonics, on music theory and the mathematics behind musical scales, in 3 books.
Wow.
Very cool, Chris.
I have not read that, but I'll put it on my list.
Well, I mean, Chris is an astronomer. He's very good at all things in terms of uh, the history of astronomy and Rosicrucians, Francis Bacon. So
Yeah.
he's a guy. He's a good guy to know. And so one of our regulars, the Awoken one, great comment. It's funny. Music and economics go hand in hand as selling albums equals cash. And if you add the encrypted meanings behind music, then that too can be connected with Francis Bacon and style of baffling people. Try not to baffle them too much, Wogan one. Yeah, that's funny.
That's my next project, is to do a deep dive on Sergeant Pepper.
Well, that would be interesting. You'd sell a lot of books there. Yeah, very cool. So yeah, you were talking about how you ended up getting into this, and you kind of came at it from the side in terms of
so yeah, Plato, he was using musical tuning to suggest in a very propagandized way that Atlantis sank because of its tuning, because it was too free. It was too luxurious. There were too many freedoms, and it just ruined everything, and then Atlantis sank. And so, lesson, we should be tuning like we tune at Athens. Athens is tuned, according to Plato, via Pythagorean tuning. So they stack fifths, and then it's tempered. I go into this in the book, but it's tempered by adjusting the thirds. And so that's what he thought. Actually, he didn't feel that Athens was the very best. Callipolis was. And then he had another city-state, Magnesia, that he described as being equally tempered, even though they didn't have equal temperament back then. It wasn't invented until about Bacon's time. But people kind of conceived of it before it became an actual thing. And we think that Plato was conceiving of equal temperament. But anyway. So
when you talk about equal temperament, what you're really talking about are the harmonics, in the sense of they're not scaled mathematically, that it's done in a different way that creates these off notes.
It ignores the harmonic series entirely. What it does is it takes the 12-note chromatic scale that doesn't close on the circle of fifths, and it smooshes down the intervals of every note. Well, some of them are augmented and some of them are smushed. But it ends up, by altering these intervals, it pulls the top of the circle of fifths back down so that the octaves will meet up. They need to be, a real octave has to be a doubled frequency for it to be just. And that's what the circle of fifths won't give you, is a just octave. It'll give you just intervals, just fifths, but not a just octave. So equal temperament is kind of like a tax on every note in order to impoverish every note so much that they all fit within that circle. And the way to do that, if you were creating a circle of fifths via Pythagorean tuning, you would multiply each frequency by 1.5, because the ratio of a fifth is 3:2.
Okay.
But in order to get your notes to fit inside the circle of fifths and have a just octave, you multiply each frequency by 1.4983071.
And you just know this off the top of your head.
Well, I've done a lot of these. As an English major, I must say, I have done a lot of calculations of fifths and equally tempered fifths. I have.
Oh, I get it.
I went down a lot of rabbit holes that didn't go anywhere. And in fact, some of those even got in my book initially. And it took me a while to realize, no, that's not a thing. You need to take that out. So, but eventually, I started to see what I was being shown.
Right.
But then, go ahead.
No. You one of the things that you said also kind of got you into this was the person who wrote the foreword to your book, someone that a lot of our viewers might actually be familiar with. So
yes.
When you're talking about the fifths and stuff, I mean, and at any time, I just adjusted the view so that if you have any images at all that you want to throw up there for us to look at, it's completely yours.
Well, and I do have an image of William. William Henry wrote the foreword to my book. And when I completed my first draft, I'm going to share a picture of him.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
will recognize, yeah, people will recognize William Henry when they see him if you're not familiar.
Okay, so tell me if I'm doing this right.
And then you click the share button down at the bottom of the screen, right? And then
Yes, I did do that.
there you go.
Do you see it now?
Not yet.
I don't see any other.
So you clicked on share, and then you can select whole screen, or you can select just the tab. But then you actually have to click on the picture of your screen to share it.
Okay, so I think I did that. See, I'm sorry if I'm breaking your broadcast. That was my fear.
Yeah, haven't broken anything. No, if you select share in the bottom, and what will happen is it will ask you if you want to share a video file or share the screen. You click share screen.
I think I just did it. Did it work?
Yes, it did. And here he comes. There he is.
Yay. Okay, so this is William Henry. He's one of the commentators on Ancient Aliens. He has some other shows on Gaia as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I follow his work. And as I finished my first draft of my book, I didn't know him personally, but I felt like I needed to contact him because I wanted to talk to him about some of the things in my book. And so my husband and I went to meet him in Nashville, and we took this tour that he gives. He gives this fascinating tour of Nashville called the Path of Souls. And he leads you down the mall in Nashville that's just down the hill from their Capitol building. And it's set up like a system of human chakras. And so he walks you through each one. And it's just fascinating. At the very end of it, like up where your pineal gland would be on the mall, are all these pillars. And you can stand directly in the center of these pillars and speak. And you get this echo back because of the frequencies bouncing off all these pillars. And it was this fascinating tour. And one of the things that he said on the tour really struck me. He said that there's this esoteric connection in his mind, in his view, between the word stone, and this is all about, and he does a lot of research into the pyramids and into even stone architecture right there in Nashville. Because they've got some ancient Greek stuff there. We saw the statue of Athena that's 40 feet tall. I mean, I highly recommend his tour if you can get to Nashville. But he sees this esoteric connection between the word stone and the word tones. He felt that there was a connection between musical frequency and stones. And I took that information home, and it resonated with me because when I had been visiting Europe in 2019, my husband is from Denmark, and we went there in 2019, and we visited Kronborg Castle, which is where Hamlet is set. So now we're getting back to Shakespeare here. Mm-hmm. And actually, I have another image I can share. And I might be able to do it more quickly now.
Practice makes perfect.
And then when we were at Kronborg, I saw this. Why isn't it coming up? Oh, it's not there. Well, I'll just tell you about it. It was a plaque, because this is the castle where Hamlet is set. Mm-hmm. And so Hamlet is the Prince of Denmark, and the royal family lived in Kronborg, which is up on the northern tip of Zealand up there. And there's this plaque of Shakespeare, and the wording below is in Danish. But they talk about how Shakespeare patterned the story of Hamlet after an ancient Viking Danish prince named Amleth. And so Shakespeare took the name of Amleth and took the last letter, tacked it onto the beginning of the word, and created Hamlet. And so when William Henry was talking about stone and tones, of course, that resonated with me. And not only that, but because I had been looking at Plato's description of Atlantis, I decided, well, I know there's some connection between Shakespeare and Bacon, I've heard.
There is.
Yeah. And also, my mind just went blank. What was the other reason?
You were talking about the connection between the two.
The connection between Shakespeare, but there's also the connection with Plato of New Atlantis and Old Atlantis. So I knew that I needed to go into New Atlantis, and I had never read it before. But I needed to see what was in there. And it occurred to me that he likely knew that Plato was encoding musical ratios in his work. And since he was already busy encoding a bunch of other stuff in his work, I figured that there might be some musical structure to New Atlantis and to their political ways.
Sure.
So anyway, I just decided to look into it, and sure enough, there was. And the first thing, I mean, there are some obvious things. He talks about sound houses, and and I quote him in the book, and there's several things that he lists in that paragraph that are of interest. But what really struck me as I'm reading New Atlantis is that he gives a ratio that I assumed must be musical, although I couldn't figure out how at first. It's the ratio of 51 to 17. There are 51 men on the ship that gets kind of not shipwrecked, but they run out of food and they have to stop at New Atlantis.
Right.
And there are 51 men on this ship, 17 of whom are sick, and 34 of whom are, he doesn't say healthy, he says whole. And so I tried to apply this ratio to every scale I could think of, and nothing was really coming together for me. And then one morning, I sat back down and I was ready to tackle the problem again. And I just knew, oh, this is a harmonic series thing. And I already had a lot of data on the series on my laptop. So I started counting. And in the harmonic series, every note is generated as an odd number. So you've got your number 1. That's your tonic. That's the very first note in any harmonic series is number 1. Then you have number 2. The second harmonic is the octave of that note. Third harmonic is your perfect fifth, but it's coming in as an odd number. Fourth, another octave. Every single even number in the harmonic series is an octave.
Okay.
So all tones are generated as odd numbers and as means. So the mean is the average between the extremes. So 3 comes in as the mean between 2 and 4, and you assume the 4. Because it's the octave, you can assume all of the octaves out to infinity.
Sure.
The 3 comes in as a mean to divide that octave, and it just keeps going on like that. So I'm looking at this, and I started with the 51st harmonic, and I'm looking at the notes of the chromatic scale that have been generated, and how they get generated in the harmonic series is kind of confusing because they jump around. You you first start out with 3 as your fifth, and then you go to 5, which it's not in order. It's not in scale order at all. If you want to generate a scale in order, you're going to be jumping around the series. You're going to start off with the 19th harmonic and then jump back to 9. And so it hops around. But once you get a full chromatic scale generated, what happens after that is you start generating more means. You keep generating tones to infinity, and they're all generated as means. So these are the quarter sounds that Francis Bacon is talking about in the sound houses paragraph. He talks of quarter sounds. It's a quarter mean. It's a mean between 2 other means. So, and this just goes on to infinity as well. So you've got the doubling of octaves that's going to infinity, and you've got the division of means that are cutting everything in half.
Right. So what you did was you started to look at, okay, the 51st one of these.
Mm-hmm. So the 51st is a mean. And so I'm looking at my listing, and I've got all means listed as means, and all of the notes that we recognize, like G, C, F sharp, I've got them listed as themselves. Whether they're an octave or this is their first appearance. If it's their first appearance, they'll come in on an odd number. If it's not their first appearance, they forever come in on even numbers. Wow. So I'm counting back all of the means because means are not whole. They're the divided tone of 2 extremes in the series, the 2 extremes that surround it. And so I labeled the means and I labeled the notes, and I counted back, and it didn't work. And I thought, well, it's so close, but it was just one off. But I thought this is interesting because it's close. And the one thing that didn't work out was there was a note in there that would have to be counted as a mean rather than a note for Bacon's numbers to work out. But then I realized, it was really at that point that I realized all notes are means. So of course I can count this as a mean if I want to, especially since it is that note's first appearance. It's the major 6th.
Right, right. And you kind of get into that in your book. And Christona
it's confusing. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And Christona just actually wrote something that you actually have in your book. Pythagoreans believe that the mathematics of music should be based on the specific ratio of 3 to 2. And you have almost, you spend half of a chapter explaining that to people.
I have a chapter called 3/2.
Yeah.
And it's all about the power of 3 checking the power of 2, which is a matter-based power. And the power of 3 is a spirit-based power. But 3 to 2 is the ratio of a perfect fifth. Mm-hmm. And so, and in the key of C, the perfect fifth is G. And as I was going along, I just had this kind of nagging suspicion that the letter G in the Freemason symbology might very well be referring to the fifth, because there are some other clues that it does.
And also, something that you may not have known is that in my research, the letter G is also what's called a cipher signature of the name Bacon.
Ah.
So it's kind of a neat little happy coincidence there.
Yeah. Well,
so
there's more than one way to look at this too.
But you also attributed, so because there were 51 sailors on the ship, mm-hmm. that's what led you to look at that 51st.
Right. So if you start at the 51st harmonic and you count the sick men who are the means, so you're going to essentially just be, well, you're actually also counting some, I would almost have to have the page in front of me because, again, this is math. But I counted 17 means or non-whole harmonics back from the 51st, and I landed on 23.
Okay.
And the 23rd harmonic turns out to be a mean, and we've always sort of considered it to be the very first mean that shows up in the harmonic series, because and what I mean by that is we generate the chromatic scale of notes up to the 27th harmonic, which is your major sixth. However, right before the 27th harmonic is this 23rd that doesn't correlate to anything. And so it's almost like, okay, we generated all of our notes, then we generate a few means, then we do our last note, the major sixth, and then we start generating means all the time. And something didn't sit right with me about that. And I started looking at the structure of the harmonic series, and I realized that the 23rd harmonic is a mean. All notes are means, but the 23rd harmonic is also a note, and it's a note that we don't acknowledge in our scale. So I ended up having to name it W, and it turned out that there were 4 of these notes, and I believe that that's what Bacon was pointing us to. He was saying, look at your 51 healthy men. Well, not healthy men. All your men are 51. So your first 51 harmonics, and count back 17 of the unhealthy ones, and you will land on the 23rd harmonic, which I'm pointing you to because it's a note and we're not aware of it.
Okay.
There's my husband. Hi.
Hello.
So I started really looking at these 4 extra means that were showing up. And the reason that I felt that they were actually notes and not just little quarter means being tucked in is because the harmonic series will generate a chromatic scale in order between the 16th and 32nd harmonics. In the first 15 harmonics, it seems to be, even though it's jumping around and it seems rather chaotic, it's actually doing something very structural and very orderly. It is generating, it's dividing the chromatic scale up in half to provide these almost structural beams that the rest of the scale will hang off of. So you've got your scale. Initially, it's just represented by an octave. And then you put that third in there, and that's the dividing mean of the octave. So that's your first structural beam. The next 2 harmonics are right here. 1/2 up here, 1/2 below the 5th. And now you've got 3 structural beams within the octave. And then it does it one more time. And that's what it's doing in harmonics 1 through 15. When you get
what you're saying is that all of these principles and rules in music are representative of a more perfect way to govern in Bacon's New Atlantis, that they kind of represent this idea of a perfect balance of where you have everything's actually in place as opposed to being off just a little bit.
Well, right. And I believe that Bacon knew this because he did a study of sound. He was studying sound at the time. And he must have understood equal temperament because it had been in use for about 40 years by the time he was working on his experiments for Silverum. So it's likely that he was aware of it. But what the harmonic series does is something that we can't do in equal temperament by multiplying each note by 1.4983071. And we also can't do in Pythagorean tuning based on the ratio of 3 to 2, because when we use that tuning system, the 3s and the 2s, they conflict.
They clash. There'll be a binaural,
right?
What you call a comma.
Pythagorean comma. So yeah, your circle of fifths won't close because there's this little gap of frequency, and you do not have a just octave. The harmonic series builds just fifths and just octaves together. So that, I think that was the first thing that he was pointing us to, is there is a way to do this. We don't have to temper equally. We can just build our scales using the harmonic series. But if we do, be aware that there are 4 notes in the chromatic scale that you're not aware of and that you're not using. However, then that was kind of trippy enough. And I kind of sat on that for a while and wasn't really sure what to do with it, because it's not like I'm some sort of musical expert that everyone's going to believe if I tell them something. You know, who am I? So I just sort of left that alone for a while. But then I started looking at Shakespeare, because that's something that's more my speed.
Sure.
And in the play King Lear, I found some things that correlated to these ideas that I was finding veiled in New Atlantis. I'm not doing ciphering. I don't know how, and that's a lot of math. I'm glad people like you are doing that, but I suspect that I could never do that, because it seems very technical. But I'm more looking at veiled metaphors and you know, more obvious little numerical ratios that I can see right there.
Sure.
So when I was looking at King Lear and looking at it with the possibility that this may have been written by Francis Bacon or him and his friends, or who, you know, however that may have happened, there is a character in King Lear who sings what is known as the tritone.
Mm-hmm.
And the tritone is a dissonant interval in the scale. In a major scale, you're not going to have the tritone showing up, because in a C major scale, for example, which is all white keys on the piano, your tritone is an F sharp. And we don't have any black keys in C major, so the tritone does not show up there. It also doesn't show up in C minor. But it is there as the tritone, and they call it the tritone because it's 3 whole steps off the tonic. So 6 half steps. And so in King Lear, Edmund, Gloucester's son Edmund, sings the tritone. And this is supposed to indicate that he's being villainous, because he's singing what they call this interval, they call it the devil in music. It's such a dissonant sound that's what they called it back then, was Diabola in Musica or something like that. So, you know, obviously that's going to attract my attention, and I looked into it. And so here is Gloucester, his father, and his 2 sons, Edgar and Edmund. And what it seems to me is that Gloucester, his name beginning with G, is representing the perfect fifth. And the fifth in the harmonic series, I call the father. If you start out with the first harmonic, your fundamental note is the mother, and she's going to multiply herself into octaves to infinity. And the ancient Greeks felt that the number 2 represented female and 3 represented male. So when the 5th comes in on the 3rd harmonic, that's the guy. So the father in King Lear, Gloucester, could very easily represent the 5th, with his 2 sons, Edgar and Edmund, representing the tritone, especially the one singing the tritone, I feel does represent the tritone in the story. And then there's Edgar, who is the legitimate son. He should be receiving his father's lands, but Edmund is trying to be sneaky and villainous and trying to steal those lands out from under Edgar. And he is the illegitimate son, and he's not entitled to those lands. Well, if you look at the harmonic series, the tritone shows up as F sharp in a C scale. And then the very first unknown note that I call W is the next note, and then the 5th. So it goes F sharp, W, for lack of a better term, G. And so when you look at equal temperament tuning can be studied because all of the frequencies are listed online. And if you look at the frequencies of an equally tempered C scale, chromatic, what you'll find is that when you get to the tritone right before the fifth, the frequency is much, much, much closer to the note W than it is to the note F sharp. And that was a shock to me. And that is really, I think, what Bacon is trying to say here. I think he's pointing to these other things too, but I think he's saying, you have a note here that you're being lied to about, because F sharp is not F sharp. F sharp doesn't even show up in the circle of fifths when you mathematically generate it. What shows up is much closer to the W note, and F sharp doesn't show up until a later octave generated around the circle of fifths.
Wow. So, that's really, really interesting, because that's a common theme with a lot of our research, a lot of the guys and a lot of the ladies that are watching right now. When we talk about Sir Francis Bacon, there were a lot of things that we were lied about in terms of his life, who he was. And once again, there's one more piece of evidence of him pointing to something that is hidden from us. And it also happens to be related to the letter F, the first of his first name. I find that to be very, very interesting. So looking at some of the messages, a lot of people are been chiming in. And I want to start with this one. Yes, my friend John Stemmer, when you play twist and shout on your guitar, you are sending a Bacon signal. Absolutely. Well, I want to confirm that for you. Thanks, my friend. And so at one point, then Jason, another a good researcher out there, great guy, Psalms 1751 is worth looking at related to Bacon. And I'm assuming that you're talking about the King James Bible there, Jason, since he had a hand in editing that for James. So a lot of people were asking also, this idea of, do you think that he was able to use music to also encrypt? Now, I know that, there are a bunch of pieces, classical pieces, where there are ciphers encoded within the music itself.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the Magic Flute, for example, is reputed to contain a cipher. I kind of want to check that out next once I get a lot of this stuff squared away, because I just find that fascinating. But so overall, the numbers that Bacon wrote in New Atlantis, as you started to research this and you were looking at how fifths and octaves worked in terms of traditional tuning versus how tuning should be. Mm-hmm. What I hear you saying is correct. What he was saying is that you could found, a more perfect society if we did it a different way, based upon just sort of the natural physics of music,
right,
as the artificial tuning that had been imposed upon people.
Yeah.
Is that right?
He also, like me, he sometimes talks about, well, he might not have been doing it in the same way that I was at all, but he does discuss monetary issues in New Atlantis. Mm-hmm. And so one thing that you'll notice in New Atlantis is that money is not inflated there. And this was, it very well could have been. Money was inflated in his time. Money has been inflated since the time of Plato and before him. So that would not have been a new idea. He would have been very familiar with the idea of that. And in New Atlantis, to show us that their ruling governors were not engaged in the process of monetary inflation, is this phrase "twice paid," which is a clear reference to the 2-to-1 octave ratio, But it also shows that no one in New Atlantis was allowed to be twice paid for one labor. And that's what allows monetary inflation is the octave ratio. It's the ratio of the fifth, 3 to 2, that will then put a check on that. And it's a good thing to have just octaves, but you don't want them to grow like a cancer. You need something opposing them in a creative tension. And that's how New Atlantis was constructed, was to have this balance.
The balance of the three. Is that what that's
3/2? Yeah.
3/2. Okay.
It's
wow.
the triality over the duality, which is encoded right in that ratio of 3/2, or the fraction 3/2.
That's really, really interesting. So basically, try to put this in a nutshell for everyone watching.
Oh, I know.
No, it's so deep, and like what a lot of the comments are like, wow, this is just, there's a lot to this, and absolutely there is. But you're talking about physics, we're talking about math, we're talking about music, all of these things, and economics, all interwoven together. It's almost like this unified theory of how a society should be best governed. And he uses those numbers to use and point at music in particular as a metaphor for governing in an economic system in New Atlantis. Did I get that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just wild. That's just so cool.
It is, yeah. But I think he would have known at the time that he was writing this that this is not the way that the world was structured in his own time or now, and that it'll be a fight to get it restructured in that way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that in particular for a lot of the Oak Island researchers that are out there watching tonight, that's one of the things that we've been talking about and collaborating about, is this idea of how he was kind of hoping that America would become that New Atlantis, where instead of changing the old world systems, because he knew that he couldn't, they could create new ones here in the new world. And that, there were a lot of things that he did in order to try to make that happen here. So that is just the fact that you just said that in my mind, I think is kind of like probably the keynote of what you were talking about tonight, in this idea that he couldn't change that old system, but in order to create this utopia, that a word coined by, I think it was by Sir Thomas More, which means no place, this idea of a perfect world, discovering this new world, well, maybe we can make that the place. I think that's really, really cool. So great job, Stephanie. I mean, you took this really, really complex idea, and you were able to, I mean, the way you can just kind of rattle off the numbers off the top of your head and explain that to people, I found that to be very, very impressive. Listen, I want to open it up to any questions here in the chat. Also, I'll tell you what, I'm going to throw up the phone number. Anyone who wants to call in real quick, we can start wrapping things up here a little bit. I want to be respectful of your time, Stephanie. You've been so gracious tonight. Showed up early, and we were working out, trying to hash out the bugs, and with me showing up late and having to reboot my machine and having all these updates and stuff, it was kind of a pain. But so yeah, anyone who has any questions you want to call in, and or ask questions. Looking here at the chat, John wants to know, is there anything Bacon did not put a code in? I'm not sure. If there is, I haven't found it yet, John. Trust me, I'm looking. Oh, here's a neat comment from Jason once again. I think it's possible that Bacon had seen formulas in the Torah in the Old Testament. I think that's highly probable. Yeah. Good comment, Jason. All right. We still have 18 live viewers hanging tough with us here tonight. So Chris Dona had asked earlier, and I missed this. I wished I had caught this early on. He asked a question about a tetrachord, and I'm not really sure what context that was in. If you want to go ahead, Stephanie, if you can.
My understanding of a tetrachord is I've never actually encountered one in my own playing, but what I understand it to be is just 4 notes, ascending or descending, that we would tend to look at as a fourth interval.
Okay.
And that back in ancient times, they would use a tetrachord and then another tetrachord, and they'd build their diatonic scale out of that.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And Chris, I've been waiting for you to chime in with this. I've been waiting for it all night, because this is kind of what Chris and I do and what we've been doing. He said, have you looked into Shakespeare's funerary plaque and Francis Drake's plate that have been called octaves? They are octaves in the sense that they are 8-lined verses. And so they're referred to as octaves. And it's kind of the funerary plaque is, the basis in the beginning of all of my research, that where I got sucked into Bacon. And I still blame Chris Dona for that, but yeah, again, it's interesting that, you have, the title of your book, The New Octave. And a lot of our research began with, 2 octaves of a different sort.
Well, and I have not looked at the funerary plaque with octaves in mind, but I did look at the 8th sonnet with that in mind. I talk about that a little bit in the book.
Oh, cool. I'll have to check that out. Jenny, one of our regular members, she's at the bit of the 3-to-2 ratio. Isn't that also a picture ratio too?
Yeah, 4:6.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And you have, again, it has to do with also just, aesthetics, in terms of what looks good, what sounds good, for sure.
Yeah.
John wants to know, so Bacon wrote a song. I don't know. I can try to hum a few slices for you, but I don't think you can dance to it. Yeah, Don, thanks for joining us. He wants to tell you, great information, very interesting. I'm amazed at the complexities of the codes. Yeah, basically what you were able to pick up on there, Stephanie, is a form of a cipher. It's called an allegorical cipher. And the idea that you can pick up on the fact that he was using those numbers specifically to point to music and principles within music that would also represent economics and a system of governance. That is a very high level of decryption that you did there, whether you realize it or not. So yeah, thanks for that a lot, Don. Great job pointing that out. Another question: was America following this economic formula before the chair in Federal Reserve? Am I allowed to say Federal Reserve on Facebook or YouTube? I'm not sure. Not supposed to mention the words fiat currency. I don't know. It's a good question. What do you think about that, Stephanie? The idea. I mean, was that really kind of the basis of the free market economy before all of that sort of?
I don't see a lot of evidence of a free market economy in the United States, even in the beginning. However, I do think that we probably would have taken a better path if we hadn't had Alexander Hamilton, if he hadn't been present. I think the other guys could have done a fairly decent job, but there were still tariffs that were created immediately. And that's not a free market when you're punishing certain shipping companies and helping other shipping companies and charging different tonnage weights, and that's just not a free market. There's government involvement. So I can't really point to any time when we've had that.
You know,
But I do in the book talk about how we got up to the point of instituting the Federal Reserve, because we had 3 central banks prior to that.
Mhm.
And each one of them was checked. And so eventually they had to find a way of instituting one that was unchecked, and they did.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay, that right there is going to get this video flagged. I just want you to know.
sorry.
No, it's good.
Yeah, that's another correlation that I make in the book, is that fiat currency can be directly correlated to equally tempered musical notes, because they're like fiat notes. Their value, their frequency value, is determined by fiat, by decision, rather than market forces.
That's mind blowing. Okay, yeah, that's really good. That right there just kind of killed me.
Oh.
Yeah, well, yeah. Tom Burns also says numerical symmetry. Yeah, absolutely. So, very, very cool. And you mentioned Hamilton, and the first thing I thought of is Thomas Jefferson, who was just the opposite, advocating a lot of the opposite things that he was,
Mhm.
and he was a huge, huge fan of Sir Francis Bacon. So
Oh, I
he
didn't.
Thomas Jefferson, absolutely. So I mean, that when you said that, I'm like, there it is, right there.
Yeah.
The-
Well, and the whole fact that they created a musical about Alexander Hamilton, I need to do a deep dive on that as well.
yeah,
But I just haven't had time. This has been taking a lot of my time up until now.
I think we might have a caller.
From
Hello,
John?
to accept, press 1. To send a voicemail, press 2.
hello.
To accept, press 1. To send a voicemail, press 2.
Okay, I don't know what's going on, so sorry. If that was you calling, I apologize. Couldn't get it to work. I was supposed to push a button, I guess. So wow, yeah, that actually, the whole idea of Hamilton being celebrated now as a musical is kind of interesting to me. And absolutely, Chris. Damn, now I wish I was musically inclined. Fascinating angle, isn't it? Though I knew you would really, really like it. You know what, Daniel? That's exactly what we need. Bacon the musical. All right. Now you can base it upon my book. His hidden autobiography. You and I are going to make millions, man. I promise. And yeah, Tom. Okay.
From
John Stemmer.
to accept, press 1.
Okay, John, is that you?
I just wanted to say you're doing a great job, Jake, and your guest was very informative.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Can
buddy.
you hear me okay?
Oh yeah, we can hear you great. I was afraid it wasn't going to work. You're my first caller. Go figure.
You sound faint on my end, but I just wanted to thank you for these in-depth podcasts that you're presenting. And
Thanks.
it's in-depth, and you make it that it's understandable for people like me, Jake.
Wow, John, thank you so much. And once again, I told you this before. Being on your podcast, I learned from the best, my friend. So thanks so much for that. I appreciate your kind words.
I hear you.
And by the way, thanks for calling in. Being my first call, appreciate it very much.
I'm your first caller.
You're my first caller ever, John.
Oh my lordy 40.
I was hoping you were going to say that.
Let's get that. Let's get that Chris the Starman Donut to call in.
Well, he could open his window and holler over to me, and we'd be able to hear him. So
I hear you.
He lives on the other side of town.
Your guest, she's fascinating. I never knew that Bacon would go that direction with ciphers and into musical aspects. It's just astounding on this guy, on his cryptic messages to us in the year 2021. Stephanie, I thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And Jake, bring it home. Goodbye.
Thanks, John. Appreciate you very much, buddy.
And I would even say we didn't touch on Silverum very much at all, but he talks about music a lot in there, and I do touch on it in my book. And he makes some fascinating commentary on music right there in it. It's not even something to be decrypted; it's just right there. And so I quote him, and if it's not easy to understand, I also kind of paraphrase what he's saying. But it's fascinating, and he was finding things, musical anomalies back then that I've never even heard musicologists talk about today.
You know, you're so right. And here's one from my friend Gracie. Music is a universal language, right? So it would make sense that he would use music. Absolutely. Daniel Spino asking me the question if I've seen Bacon as having an alias that was a composer. I haven't even looked there yet, Daniel. You know, I know of at least 3 he used as an artist, as a painter. But when it comes to composing, I haven't even had a chance to go there. I don't know if I should. Really, I mean, when you consider to start thinking about all of the different things that he was a mathematician, scientist, engineer, artist. He is the guy that we use as the definition and where the word comes from of a Renaissance man.
Yeah.
Right. And so the idea that he would have a musical background and write extensively about music. And I was going to ask you about Solarium, but we're running out of time. But you know, there's so, and if you haven't had a chance to, you know, check that out, make sure you actually kind of do a deep dive. It's a heavy read, especially, you know, if you're not an English teacher or a literature major or an English major, when you start reading Shakespeare and Shakespearean Elizabethan language, if you're not that well versed in it, it could take you a while, but it's definitely worth it once you realize the complexity of the man's ideas and what he was really doing. So Stephanie, go ahead and let's have you plug your book and tell people where they can find it. If you have a website, tell us about that.
I do have a website. It's just my name, stephaniepetersen.net. And I have a blog. I'm not on there every day, but I'm trying to build that up a little bit. stephaniepetersen.net. And then my book is available on Amazon. The title is The Next Octave. The subtitle is A Sustainable Economy Encoded in Music. Because there really is quite a bit in there economically slanted. We didn't really cover that as much because this was more a show about Bacon. But really the first 11 chapters are going to be a little econ heavy.
Yeah, but you know, that's great. You did touch upon it in terms of the economy of New Atlantis and how it works, and it does relate to specifically, you know, the for all intents and purposes, the cipher that you decoded in New Atlantis. So, well, listen, gang, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Stephanie, thanks so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me.
Your information was just fascinating. I just love it when people do a real deep dive and they're so knowledgeable about their content area where you can just kind of, you know, spell it out for us and we can make sense of it. And then we show how it relates to all of the stuff we do here at Ghosts of Bacon. So thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Listen, gang, we'll do this again in a couple of weeks. And, you know, thanks for hanging with us tonight. We went, well, about 20 minutes longer than I usually go. And because it was that good. So once again, thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, everyone. Great show. Bye, everybody. See you next time. Thanks, Stephanie.